Hey class, it's Rachel here talking about our class content for October 19th. So thanks for hanging with me as we go through some schedule changes and adjustments. We talk a little bit about visual aids and then wrap up with a little assignment that you need to do for Wednesday's class. So first of all, let's talk about schedule. So since I'm not physically present there, I made some adjustments for the week. So instead of having our exam on Wednesday, we will push that off and have the exam on Friday. So Wednesday, we will have classes scheduled. We will kind of wrap up all this information, do an exam review, and get you guys ready for the test on Friday. A couple other changes is that the journal entry that was originally scheduled for Friday, I did push that out to be due next Monday because of the test and everything else that's happening this week. So that got pushed out till Monday. Also, for your idea pitch drafts, they were due today. So I did put a Dropbox out on Moodle so you can upload those electronically, and I'll look at them and give you feedback on those. I think that's it for all the schedule changes, but the Moodle is updated with our schedule so that you can go and look and see what's happening this week. The last thing is we do have our idea pitch competition starting next Monday. It'll be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I put a Google Doc link out on Moodle so that you can go out and sign up for when you want to present in those 2 days. So we'll be presenting Monday and Wednesday. There'll be 3 groups of 4 on Monday, 2 groups of 4, and 1 group of 5 on Wednesday. So you can follow that link and choose what slot you would like for the competition. And then Friday will be the day where the winners of each one of those groups will then compete for the top 3 prizes for our class. So that's out there too. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about visual aids, and then we'll circle back to this on Wednesday and just kind of think about it in the context of your idea pitch presentations. So we're actually going to go over to a PowerPoint, and I'm going to walk through a few things as we talk through visual aids. Okay, let me make sure that I'm showing you everything that you need to see. Hold on. Here we go. All right, so as we talk about visual aids, a couple things first before we get into the design portion is thinking about what makes visual aids good and bad. And I know we've all been in situations where we have seen poor visual aids put together, whether they're distracting or the design is poor or they're hard to read. But even before we get to the design component, we need to think about the reasons why we use visual aids. And that's why we create our outline of any presentation first, because that is where you pull your visual aids from. And as the presenter, you need to be selective about which one of your points actually need a visual aid, because you are telling the story, you are the presentation, not your visual aid or your PowerPoint. So your presentation should never be directly what you're saying. It is there to support your message. So some reasons or some places where you could create a visual aid, first of all, is just to get them interested or more interested in your topic. As you're talking along, it can then trigger some more interest if you have an interesting image or some key points that are on the screen or something that you've handed out to them. It can also draw their attention to the critical points of your message. So if you have a key statistic or something that you want them to take away from the presentation, then that visual could help solidify that and hopefully increase them remembering what it is that you were saying to them. It can also provide transition points. I know for myself, sometimes I'll use it to say that we have moved on to a new section, so that can be helpful to provide that transition point. And then it can also simplify things. So if you have a very complicated graph or a table or just data in general, you can use a visual aid to maybe summarize that and give good information about what the key elements are in that message. However, it is really important to think through, and I know with our idea pitch presentations, I'm asking you to do one slide, so obviously we're keeping it very minimal. But in any presentation, we want to keep the visual aids to a minimum because once again, we want the focus to be on you as the presenter, not on the presentation. And that's why it's kind of one of my pet peeves if we walk into a presentation and the first thing they do is open up a PowerPoint and turn off the lights. Because that means to me that the presentation, the actual visual aid is the presentation, not the person, and we want it to be reversed. So we're going to talk through some design principles, and these are actually from a really great book called Presentation Zen. So I pulled out a couple of the points from there, and we're going to walk through each one of these as we talk through this. And the point of this is we want to make the visual aid to be clear, not distracting, visually appealing, and all those other things to help support your message. Like it's there to support your message. It's to aid, it's a visual aid, it's aiding your message. So the first one we're looking at is the signal to noise ratio. And we can see in the top left corner a very busy image that we could put on a slide versus the bottom right corner, which is much more simple, not many distractions. So the signal to noise ratio is the point where we want to make sure we take out anything that takes away from the message. So any extra grids, lines, logos, footers, extra charts we see on this top left-hand corner. There's not only charts, but there's also images and there's stars and everything is covered. There's some text on the side. I mean, it's just overwhelming. So some of the recommendations for how to do this is if you have a logo, say for your company, to only put it on the first and last slide and not on every single one. And then limit the number of bullet point slides. So you can have them, that's fine, but intersperse those with some more image-driven type slides. Also, a lot of templates even will come with extra boxes and extra color streams and little things along the bottom. And even bullet points can be distracting. I know for me, I've started to take out and use fewer bullet points to just eliminate anything that could be possibly distracting. Secondly, we have image-driven or the picture superiority. And I put up this slide just as an example of having an image as a support to your words. So pictures are remembered better than words, especially when the pictures represent something very common or concrete when you're describing something or have just like this simple message. So this was supporting a talk where I was talking about an approach that we can take to bringing faith to our work. We could take the turtle approach. And so this was up on the screen while I was telling personal stories and just kind of discussing how I see this topic. So instead of having them read everything that I was saying, this was an image that hopefully would help them remember the message after I was done. The next element is using empty space or white space. And I thought this was kind of funny. I found this as I was looking at different design elements. My son is crazy into Star Wars, so we talk about Star Wars quite a bit. But empty space is not nothing. It is a powerful something, and we need to learn to see it. So empty space helps guide the eye if someone is watching your presentation to what is important on the screen. So instead of having a screen full of text, having some white space and empty space helps direct to what is actually you want them to look at on the screen. So even on this slide, we have a simple image in the bottom left-hand corner and then just a simple statement in the middle. And instead of, I could have put, white space and why it's important, and then throw that quote in at the bottom, but instead this once again helps support your message. Also, what goes along with this is using white space to make your slides asymmetrical, because then that activates that empty space and makes your design truly more interesting, more informal, and more dynamic. Instead of having everything balanced, everything symmetrical, and then space becomes pushed to the edges, and then it makes it less powerful. So empty space can be a powerful thing. So this was another slide or image that I found that just says, having that white space is important, and filling the space doesn't always mean filling it with words or images, but using white space to help bring the attention to where you want it to be. This is another way that we can combine the usage of images and text in a very design-driven way. We have the image, it's not distracting, but it definitely pulls out the point about being about kids. And then it's asymmetrical, and it draws the eye to that statistic on the top left-hand corner. So that's another way of how we can use design to help our visual aids. We can also, I don't have a specific slide for this one, but using repetition, and later, I'll bring this up later, I guess, because I have two slides that have that mirror the background or the image, but sometimes you can bring back an image to help clarify your design or bring back, and that just makes it more memorable if you're using repetition. I thought this was kind of a funny one, but thinking about proximity, and proximity is where you move things either closer or farther apart to achieve a more organized feel to it. So related items should be grouped together to view as a group instead of having it be unrelated. So that's where we can use grouping on the side of a screen. We have our two gnomes. Obviously, it's something that signifies that they have some sort of relationship because they're close to each other. So that's another way that we could use either images or text in a proximity to help identify that those things are connected or related. So this is an example of repetition. I used this background in an earlier slide, and that had our design principles, and now we're back talking about some general guidelines. So that repetition helps as we are going through the presentation, say, oh, yep, that's familiar. So a couple other, and these are more general guidelines for any sort of visual aid. First of all, keeping it simple, and I think the design principles that I mentioned help you to do that. So how you put your slides together or your visual aid together so that it's not cluttered, it's something that's easy to see, and that you don't overuse them. If you have 50 slides for a 5-minute presentation, that's overloading your listeners. So thinking about keeping it simple. Secondly is to cover up your visual aids when you're not using them. And that goes along with the last point I have on the screen by pressing the B key for black. So anytime that you are taking a break from using your visual aid, it can be helpful if you cover it up. And for PowerPoint, you can hit the B key and you'll have a black screen, a W key, you can have a white screen, and then you press it again to bring back your image. If you're using a flip chart or whiteboard, as soon as you're done using it, as soon as it makes sense, either erasing it or turning it over can help bring the attention back to you as the speaker, and that's what's important. Thirdly is not turning your back, and I feel like this is a huge issue where if you have a PowerPoint presentation in particular, I have a lot of people that they will turn and actually talk to the screen when they're doing their presentation. Then you don't have to do eye contact, and then sometimes we're not prepared enough, so we're using that PowerPoint as a crutch. So avoiding turning your back to the audience and speaking to the screen. You can always look at the computer that's in front of you to see that, or print off your slides so that you're not distracted by what's behind you. The last thing is to prepare for technology issues. There will always be technology issues. So you need to be ready to present without technology. I remember there were a couple times where I was teaching a speech class, and there were some individuals that had their presentation and they hadn't printed out their slides, and they really weren't ready to do it as if they didn't have their PowerPoint. And we had some technology issues, and they were like, well, can I like turn my PowerPoint around so everyone can look at it on my computer? And I was like, well, I guess so, but I don't think everyone's going to be able to see it. And they were so attached to making sure that everyone could see their PowerPoint that they over-relied on it. And as a result, it wasn't very successful. So you should always bring a printed out copy of any sort of visual aid that you're using in case it doesn't work, especially if you use something that you have to go to the internet to use. So if you have your presentation on Google Drive, or if you're using a Prezi, and then all of a sudden the Wi-Fi fails and you're not able to pull that up, you need to be able to go without it. And that's an important skill to take into the business world. Speaking of Prezi, I know many of you have used this in your classes as well. Just a couple of things that I think about when using Prezi. That's something that I've used too, and it works. It works well in certain contexts. So if you haven't tried it, you can go and get an educational account for free at Prezi.com, and it might be, if you're a more visual person and like things to be really visual, Prezi is an awesome tool. But there's some dangers to it, because you can start placing, as you can see, there's all these placeholders and text fields that you could put in. You need to have a plan. So once again, having your outline of your presentation done before you even look at a visual aid, that is really, really important, and even more so with Prezi, because PowerPoint is very linear. It's, you know, slide by slide by slide, but Prezi, you can go all over the place. And so this is something where maybe we need to think through spatially, even draw a mind map of what that Prezi is going to look like. And keeping it simple is important. The big thing about Prezi that you can do is you can create a path where you can say, look at the large circle and then zoom into a smaller circle and then zoom into something smaller and then zoom out to go somewhere else. You need to be really careful about how you do that path, because it can start to be very overwhelming for the audience, especially if you have a lot of turns and twists and spinning, and that's where I think people get a little turned off by Prezi. So if you create a path that is simple and not seasick inducing, that will make it a better experience for you and also for the people that are watching it. And that's what I mean about focusing on the audience. Look at it from their perspective, not just how cool you think that you want it to be. But I would try it out. It's especially good if you're showing a process, so something that's non-linear. So that's an important thing that you could use it for. And then also, if you want to show documents, it's really great because you can put the whole document and then zoom into the document, versus PowerPoint doesn't do that very well. You can do a screenshot of a document, but then you have to crop it so that you can see it on the screen, and Prezi lets you zoom in. I know I've done some Prezis for looking at a legal process, and then we would put the contract documents in there and then zoom into a phrase in the contract, and that was really helpful for thinking through it as a process. So just to recap, if we're thinking through visual aids, they're expected in many situations, but your message comes first. So create your message first, and then critically look at it to decide whether or not a visual aid makes sense. And then thinking through the design principles in a very understandable way will help you create something that will be memorable and interesting for your audience. So a couple of things for Wednesday. I'd like you to create one PowerPoint slide that follows these design principles and supports a presentation about your favorite pastime and why we should join you in your pastime. And that'll be something that is due by class on Wednesday. We'll also be doing some summary activities and an exam review as well. So just to recap, I know that was a quick overview to visual aids, but just a couple of key points. I know I summarized, but I wanted to just summarize one more time. Anytime that you're asked to put together a presentation, a visual aid is something that you'll probably be asked to do as well. There are a lot of ways that you could approach that. But what I would desire is that anytime that you're asked to create a presentation with a visual aid, that you make sure a couple of things, key things. Number one, that the focus is on you as the presenter and not on your presentation, and that you use that visual aid to support and enhance your message and not replace the personality and all the presentation skills and the connecting that you're doing with your audience. That's what comes first. Secondly, that you think about using some design principles to help guide the audience to what's important. Using that empty space, using the visual things that we can do to take away the noise from our visual aids, and using the repetition and the proximity to help create some relationships in the mind of our listeners. And then lastly, that you are prepared with your visual aids. So you know what's on it, that you are prepared to go without your visual aid if there's technology issues, and that you use it something that you can support your message in a coherent way. The other danger is when you're trying to make really great visual aids, you spend all your time on your visual aid and not so much on your practicing. And I see that a lot. So as you're creating these visual aids, yes, make them awesome, but don't forget to take and leave enough time for you to practice with your visual aids before you present, so that it comes across natural and that you aren't over-reliant on your visual aids as you present. Well, just another reminder for Wednesday, bring your PowerPoint slide that relates to one of your favorite pastimes and that convinces us that we should join you in that. So bring that on Wednesday. I'll put a Dropbox out on Moodle for those so we can have those there. And then we'll spend time on Wednesday reviewing and making sure that we're ready for the exam, which is on Friday. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.